This episode of Brains on Games is a preview of an abstract game about a conversation. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we are going to preview a game that's all about having a conversation, but it's really abstract, in fact, and it's a game that was sent to me recently by the folks at Quality Beast, who also came out with a game a while back called Seize the Bean, a game about owning the very best coffee shop. And that game had some of the best components. It's one of my favorite games, honestly, that's come out since I started this channel. So I was very excited when Quality Beast sent me a prototype of their new game, which is called Philosophy. Now, Philosophy is a game for 2 players, but there are expansions that will allow you to bring up the play count to 3 or to 4. It's a game that plays in 5 minutes to half an hour, and it's a game that works with kids aged 10 and up. So it's a strategy game that works with some slightly younger kids than the teenagers that I usually talk about on Brains on Games. Let's take a deeper look at Philosophy. Before I do that, though, take a look at the artwork on this box, which is fantastic. So let's take a deeper look at the board and the components for Philosophy. So Philosophy is a light to medium, I would say, strategy game. It's one of those games where it's pretty quick to explain the rules, but the intricacies of how the pieces interact is something that you really have to play to be able to kind of understand and grasp. What you're trying to do to win this game is to put these tiles on a board in a way that you manage to get 3 in a row. That's how you reach a conclusion in this discussion. So it's called a conversation or a discussion, and 3 of these in a row, horizontally, vertically, or diagonally, is going to be reaching a conclusion. But it's really abstract. I mean, what about these pieces would evoke a discussion? There's really nothing. It's just the way that the pieces interact on the board, and they've kind of put this philosophical theme on top of it. The good thing is, though, if you become an expert in this game, you could consider yourself perhaps to be a doctor of philosophy. So you could get your PhD in board games, maybe. This is a prototype. So these pieces they're printed on foam core on the version that I have. But Quality Beast, in their last game, their components were so amazing. And all of the videos and pictures I've seen of the components for Philosophy tell me that this is also going to be very well thought out in terms of the pieces themselves and the board. But although the pieces are going to change, the symbols on the pieces are going to be the same. And what you're doing in this game is you're putting 1 tile at a time somewhere on the middle 9 spaces on this board. The first turn, you're not allowed to put a tile in the center, but of course you can do that later on. Now the tiles are special. You may be able to see they look like a water drop almost, and they have a little white arrow pointing out and then a shaded arrow in the middle. And I'm moving the board around as I'm talking, and similar on the other side. Each player starts with a dozen of these pieces that have arrows pointing in different directions. And these arrows are what tells you how the pieces interact with one another on the board. So here is a piece that has the white arrow pointing up. The white arrow is the targeting arrow. That is the piece that this one is going to interact with. So this is a really interesting piece, actually. It's one of my favorite ones, where if I've got a piece on the board, say like this, and I place this yellow piece here, what's going to happen is it targets the one up above it, but it's going to pull it down. So both pieces wind up moving. So this is a pulling piece. So you pull that other tile down 1 space. Now, if I put it on the other side, I would pull it in the other direction. So it's very clear once you get used to those symbols on the tiles, what they all mean. If I've got a piece like this one, it's pointing diagonally at this piece, and I can move this one either way, but it's 1 space diagonally. So there are pieces that will allow you to, say, toss another piece. So if I put this here, I can make this other piece jump out over top of my own because there are 2 arrows in the middle. So what you're doing in this game is you're placing these tiles, you're trying to target another tile on the board in order to move it somewhere with the ultimate goal of getting 3 of yours in a row. Of course, the other player is also playing tiles and trying to make the same thing happen. So it's a real duel, a back and forth chess-like kind of a game where you're moving these pieces around and trying to plan ahead where they're going to go so that you can prevent your opponent from getting three in a row while positioning your pieces in a better spot. Now, another interesting thing about philosophy is that the placement of your pieces could cause a chain reaction, and pieces might move really back and forth all over the place as a result. So, for example, if I had a piece let me see if I can figure this out. If I have a piece like this one, if I play a piece like this, it's targeting the tile above it. It's going to move that tile one space to the left on your camera. I think it's one space to the left, but now it's going to interact with this other tile over here, which is going to pull everything over. So if you've got a bunch of tiles on the square, you potentially could activate more than one. Now, I can only activate the tiles that are in my color, and they're only going to activate if another tile moves into its targeting zone, or if I move my piece into so that it targets another player's tile. Another fun piece is this one that has this little rotating arrow in the middle of it. This is a rephrase piece, they call it, because again, the conceit here is that it's a conversation, but it's going to allow you to rotate the tile that it targets. So if I put this tile right here, it's going to rotate mine any direction I want, but I would rotate it this way. Now it targets this one, and it's going to move that one down one space. So you're moving these pieces all around, and you're trying to get your three in a row. So like I said, this is a game where the information on the tiles is very clear. There's not even any reading required. Once you get used to those icons on the tiles, it's clear what each one of them does, and I really like that. That's like the Duke. The Duke is one of my favorite games, and the movements are printed right on the pieces. So it is similar in some ways to that one, but it takes some time to get used to how those movements are going to create the chain reactions. And eventually, after we played, 3 or 4 games, all of a sudden now it was almost second nature that, okay, usually I want to take a piece like this one as my first piece because it doesn't do too much that's special. It's sort of a horizontal and vertical piece. I like to keep the diagonal ones for later. That was kind of my philosophy as I played through the game of philosophy. Another thing that I didn't even mention is that in a game, we didn't have this happen in a 2-player game, but in a 3 or a 4-player game, the board is going to potentially get more crowded. And if a player can't place one of their tiles in these center squares, if all 9 are taken up, then they lose the game and their opponent will win. So that's another kind of a wrinkle, but that never happened in our game because we did find ourselves trying hard to move our opponent's pieces into spaces where it was harder to access them, since you can only play your tiles in the center. If you had a piece that was all the way back there, it's hard to get 3 in a row unless you're moving your own pieces outside of the square. So it's a super abstract game that has this conversational theme kind of pasted over the top of it. And that is my question for this episode. Are you a player for whom theme is very important? Do the mechanics of the game have to link up very closely with the theme of the game you're playing? Like in Turf War, where everything you do makes sense and you're battling to have the best lawn, and everything in that game is related to lawn care and convincing your neighbors that your lawn is the best. This is one where, you could have come up with any theme to explain what's happening with these pieces, but the game itself is more abstract. Are you a person for whom theme is very important, or is an abstract game something that you really enjoy playing? That's my question for you this episode, and you can leave a comment below the video. But what skills are you developing when you play a game like philosophy? Well, this is a game that does involve a lot of visual spatial reasoning and spatial planning. So you're looking at this board and figuring out from the way the pieces are laid out, how are they going to move? What space do you want your piece to go to? What tile can I place in order for that to happen? So there's spatial problem solving, and there is a lot of planning involved, but you're also juggling a lot of information. When you're looking at those chain reactions, you don't get to place your tile and move things physically to see how it's going to work. that's your turn. You have to think about how those pieces are going to move and react to one another before you place them, and then you act out that action. So you do wind up visualizing, but keeping a lot of tile movements in mind as you're thinking about where you're going to place things as you're playing the game. And when you're juggling information in memory, that is an example of a working memory activity. Working memory is the whiteboard in your mind where you keep information so that you can do something with it. And this game involves that spatial visualization, but you're visualizing multiple movements and trying to think ahead. You may even be looking at the tiles that your opponent has left to be able to say, well, oh, they've already used this one, so I know that they're not going to be able to jump my piece to the other side. So there are considerations like that as well. So there's a lot going on in memory, but it is primarily a visual spatial game where you're doing that logical thinking. This leads to this, leads to this, but keeping all that in mind as a working memory activity. There's one other thing. I didn't mention this piece. This is a respect token that comes with the game. So there's a little bit of there's a little social interaction or a social skill involved here. If a player makes a particularly convincing argument, if they do a really good move, you can hand them this token to show your appreciation for what they did. Now, that is a skill. Interesting that we didn't use this token too much. Every once in a while, I give it to my son. He never gave it back to me. I get no respect at home. But the respect token is one that's interesting because you are showing your opponent that you appreciate a move. You're trying to beat them in a game and show that you're better than they are at this game, but at the same time, they might make a move that you like, that you respect, and so you're sort of having mixed feelings maybe about your opponent, and that is something that's good to get kids to think about. Having more than one feeling at a time is an important skill in the development of resilience. So I do like these games where they add some little element that encourages kids to think about their opponent in a game in a positive way. Final thoughts about philosophy. Well, this is a game that I think once the components, the actual components themselves come out, this is a game that I think is going to be a great tactile experience. The tiles that I've seen on the campaign look fantastic. It's a game that you can set up and explain very quickly. It's simple to set up. It's simple to explain. There's no heavy reading. It's one of those things where the bar for entry is low, which I really, really like because it's a game that's going to hit the table more often if the bar for entry is low. It plays quickly, so you can play multiple games with a new player so that they get used to it. And then once they become more expert at it, it's going to be a more challenging game. But I do think there's some replayability here as well. And a bonus is that there's a print and play version of this game that can be downloaded. And you can cut out these little pieces and try it out for yourself to see if it's something that you think you'd like. But I do think the Quality Beast components are going to be high quality components, and they're probably going to be worth having. It's got a chess-like kind of feel to it with the iconography here on top of the tiles that is pretty clear once you get used to it. And I do like those kinds of games, those chess-like games, those abstract games where you're moving pieces around a board. I've always found that to be fun, and they're extra special if you can include 4 players instead of playing with just 2. If there's a downside to the game, honestly, the only downside I can think of is this. The box for this game is almost but not quite square. So closing it up is almost like plugging in a USB. It's like, oh, that's the wrong way. Oh, wait, that's still the wrong way. It might take a few tries before you get the box cover closed up on this thing. So there's no real downsides to a game like this. If you like abstract kind of tile moving games where the pieces interact in interesting ways, then this is definitely one that I think is worth trying out. And thanks so much to Quality Beast for sending this game my way. I will include in the show notes a link to the crowdfunding campaign. The pre-orders are up as I'm recording this now. It's been up for a little while, but it's still active. I used the link today, in fact, just to make sure. If you want to answer my question about abstract versus thematic games. If you have comments or suggestions, you can leave them in the comment section below the video, or you can email me at brian at brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go. The previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.